"He sold your food, Tommy, for drugs." The words fell out before I could stop them. My grandson stared at me with his mouth open, still chewing the last bite of dry toast I'd scrounged together. I had just found out David pawned his mother's wedding ring. Not for rent, not even for food. He'd traded it to a dealer using his own son's groceries as collateral. My hands were shaking, but not from age, from fury, from shame, from the sick realization that the boy sitting across from me had been starving so his father could stay high. I'd seen men rot from the inside during my years at the plant, but never this close. What David didn't know was, I kept everything, every receipt, every lie, every bruise on that boy's spirit. He thought I'd just keep hoping. He forgot who raised him. He left my grandson starving. Now I'm coming for everything he still thinks he owns. My name is Walter Hartley, and I'm 75 years old. Every morning I still wake before sunrise in my one-bedroom home, where the percolator hisses and the wall clock ticks among my hand-labeled toolboxes. 40 years at Riverton Steel taught me the value of routine and records. My son David, once so full of promise, now brings only unpaid bills and missed visits to my grandson Tommy. His bloodshot eyes and trembling hands tell the story his lips won't. Cocaine has him, but he doesn't know I kept every receipt, noted every broken promise just like I did as union steward tracking safety violations. Tommy, who has his grandmother Mary's gentle eyes, deserves better than empty cupboards and hollow excuses. A father who lets his child go hungry tells you everything about his soul. But let me start from the beginning. Even now, 3 months later, I can't shake the memory of that Sunday afternoon. Tommy sat at David's kitchen table, those big brown eyes fixed on a half-empty glass of water, his cheeks carved into shadows I hadn't noticed the week before. You know that sick feeling when something's wrong but your mind's still catching up? That's how it hit me, standing in my son's kitchen with the sour milk smell crawling up my nose. "Hey, sport," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's see what we can fix for lunch." Tommy's shoulders hunched a little, the way Mary's used to when she was holding back tears. I opened the refrigerator, and my heart sank. 2 wrinkled apples rolled against each other in the produce drawer. No bread. An empty pasta box tipped sideways on the counter. The milk that was stinking up the place had expired 2 weeks ago. Mary's photo watched from its dusty perch on the shelf, her smile frozen behind smudged glass. I could almost hear her voice. "Walter, that boy needs help." My stomach knotted tight as a fist. "David," I called out. "Need to talk about groceries, son." He emerged from his bedroom, jittery as a cat. "Dad, I know how it looks." His teeth chattered slightly, though it wasn't cold. "But I've got work lined up Monday, good work. Contractor needs help with a renovation project." I've heard enough empty promises in my years as union steward to know the sound. But there was Tommy trying to make himself smaller in that kitchen chair, and I knew I couldn't wait for David to get his act together. "Tommy," I said, "how about we take a little trip to Miller's Market? Get you set up with some Granddad's emergency supplies?" His eyes lit up at that, though he glanced quick at his father first. David nodded, probably relieved to dodge the conversation about where the grocery money had gone. At Miller's, I filled a cart while Tommy stayed close, his hand brushing against my sleeve now and then like he was making sure I was still there. Peanut butter, the good kind Mary always bought. Oatmeal, powdered milk that would keep, bread, soup cans, fruit cups, anything that could last and fill a hungry belly. When we got to the register, I caught Mrs. Miller's eye and slipped her my credit card before David could see the total. She'd known Mary and me for 30 years. She understood without words. Back at David's place, I helped Tommy pack his emergency kit into his school backpack. "This is just between us granddad and grandson," I told him, showing him how to mix the powdered milk. "Sometimes a man needs his own backup plan." I pulled out my yellow ledger that night, the one I've kept since my union days, started a new page, Tommy's timeline, noted his hollow cheeks, the dark smudges under his mouth's eyes, taped the grocery receipt inside, wrote down David's promise about Monday's job. Sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by my own well-stocked cabinets, I tried to believe tomorrow could still turn around, that David would show up for that job, that the groceries would last until his first paycheck, that my grandson wouldn't go hungry again. But I knew better. 40 years watching men at the plant had taught me to spot the signs, the shaking hands, the endless excuses. The way David's eyes never quite met mine anymore. A week's worth of groceries wasn't going to fix what was wrong in that house. I double-checked my door locks that night. Something about Tommy's quiet fear, making me need that extra security. The yellow ledger sat on my nightstand, a new entry in my neat handwriting. October 15th, first emergency grocery run, 147.82. Tommy down at least 5 pounds since summer. A brown envelope showed up in my mailbox 3 days after that grocery run. Return address, Pike Property Management. My hands knew what was coming before my brain caught up. That paper had the same weight as layoff notices I'd handled as union steward. Inside was a letter addressed to me as the emergency contact, with a copy of what David had already received. Raymond Pike's signature at the bottom looked like it had been carved with a knife. Final notice of eviction. Balance due in full. Lease terminates in 14 days. You know that moment when the doctor tells you something's wrong, and the room goes quiet except for your heartbeat. That's how it felt, standing there with that notice burning in my hands. I walked to my kitchen calendar, the one with Mary's cardinals still marking each month, and circled Friday the 14th in red. 2 weeks, the same amount of time the plant used to give before shutting down a furnace. My pension statement sat on the table where I'd left it that morning. I'd been doing the math already, trying to figure how many more grocery runs I could manage. Now I pulled out my old ledger and started writing numbers. Pension, $1,287. The balance stared back at me like a broken gauge. David's back rent was $2,800. Even if I emptied my account, the numbers wouldn't stretch far enough to cover both rent and food. Not with winter coming and the heating bills about to climb. I tried David's cell twice. First time straight to voicemail. Second try, he picked up on the 4th ring. Dad, I know what you're calling about. His words slurred together like hot steel running too fast. I just need a bridge loan, 2 weeks tops. Got a sure thing coming. David, this isn't about loans anymore. Tommy needs... Can't talk now. Meeting my contractor in 10. I'll make it right, promise. Click. The sun was setting when I walked over to their apartment. No lights on, but I could hear movement inside. I knocked 3 times. Who is it? Tommy's voice, small and careful. It's Grandad, Sport. The door opened just enough to show Tommy's face. Behind him, nothing but shadows and that sour milk smell, stronger now. His stomach growled loud enough to echo in the hallway. The sound hit me like a hammer to the chest. Your dad home? Tommy shook his head. He said he'd bring dinner when he got back. I thought about Mary, how she'd handle this moment. She always knew the right words. Me, I just had action. Come on, I said. Let's get you something to eat while we wait. In my kitchen, I pulled out bread and cheese. The real kind, not that plastic stuff David bought when he bothered to shop at all. The butter sizzled in the pan like it used to on Sunday mornings when Mary made breakfast for all of us. Tommy ate 2 grilled cheese sandwiches without pause, then looked at the third like he was afraid it might disappear. Go on, I told him. Growing boy needs his strength. When 9 o'clock rolled around, I walked him back upstairs. Still no lights on in their apartment, still no David. I'll talk to your dad first thing, I promised. You just concentrate on school tomorrow. Back in my apartment, I sat in Mary's old rocker, staring at her folded flag in its display case. The grocery receipts in my ledger suddenly felt like Band-Aids on a broken leg. What good was food if they didn't have a roof over their heads in 2 weeks? The eviction notice lay on my coffee table, that deadline circled in red on my calendar, casting its shadow over everything else. 14 days. Food wasn't going to solve this one, not when the clock was ticking down to 0. 7:15 the next morning, I sat at my kitchen table watching the second hand sweep around my wall clock. Each tick felt like a hammer strike at the plant. Measured, mechanical, moving towards something that couldn't be stopped. 7:30, the time David usually dropped Tommy at school. From my window I watched them hurry past. Tommy's backpack looked emptier than usual. No lunch bag in sight. Ever notice how worry makes time stretch like taffy? By 8 I'd reorganized my entire tool drawer. Twice. By 9 I'd called every number I had for David. Nothing. You don't spend 40 years working steel without learning patience. But this wasn't about waiting anymore. This was about Tommy going hungry, while his father chased whatever high he could find. I grabbed my jacket and headed for O'Rourke's bar. Not exactly a morning spot, but the neon open sign buzzed anyway, fighting against the grey September light. A kid mopping the floor, couldn't have been more than 20, looked up as I pushed through the door. "Mr. Hartley, your boy was in the back room last night. Real late. The air inside hit me like an old ashtray, sweet and stale despite the smoking ban. Christmas lights blinked along the ceiling, 6 months early or 3 months late, depending on how you looked at it. Music thumped from somewhere behind the wall. I found David in the back room, leaning against the pool table. 3 other men I didn't know stood around him, all of them with that same jittery energy that seemed to follow my son these days. "Dad." David straightened up too fast. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you. Tommy went to school without lunch today." "Yeah, I was just about to handle that. Got a guy coming by with some work." "Janice," the morning beau bartender snorted from behind the counter where she was stacking glasses. Her eyes dropped to David's neck, where Mary's gold chain hung empty. "That ring's been gone a week," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. The world tilted sideways for a second. Mary's wedding ring, the one David had begged to keep after the funeral, swearing he'd treasure it always. My hands started shaking. The ring. I kept my voice steady, the way I used to, when addressing problem workers at union meetings. "Your mother's ring." David's hand went to his throat, fingers touching the bare chain. "It's just temporary, Dad. I'll buy it back Friday." "Like you'll pay the rent Friday?" The words came out harder than I meant them to. "Like you'll buy groceries Friday?" "You don't understand." "I understand plenty." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the sour sweat on him. "That ring was the last piece. Of her we had. And you sold it for powder, didn't you?" His eyes darted to his friends, then back to me. "It's not like that. I got a deal lined up." "Stop lying!" The shout burst out before I could catch it. Every head in the place turned our way. "Your boy's going hungry while you're in here playing pool, and now I find out you sold Mary's ring?" David's face twisted. "It was mine to sell. She left it to me." That's when I saw it. Really saw it. The son I'd raised was gone, replaced by something that looked like him but wasn't. Something that would trade his mother's memory for a few hours of chemical peace. My fists clenched. In 40 years at the plant, I'd never once thrown a punch. But right then, looking at David's defensive sneer, I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. Instead, I turned and walked out. The night air hit me like a slap, my breath clouding in front of me. September shouldn't be this cold, but everything felt wrong now. I stood there, staring at nothing, letting the truth sink in. Mary's ring was gone. Not misplaced or temporarily loaned. Gone. Probably sitting in some pawn shop's display case, or worse, already melted down. The last piece of her we had turned into white powder and disappeared up my son's nose. The parking lot's gravel crunched behind me, and I turned to find Carl Whitaker, his broad shoulders silhouetted against O'Rourke's neon. He'd been my go-to safety man back at the plant, the kind who could spot trouble before it sparked. "Rough morning, Walt?" His grey mustache twitched. Couldn't help but overhear. "Yeah." I rubbed my face, trying to massage away the anger. Not how I planned to start my day. Carl shifted his weight, hands in his pockets. The gesture reminded me of all those times we'd stood together after. Accidents, figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it. "Before your boy pays that debt in ways you can't fix," he said carefully, "maybe you could use another set of eyes." That stopped me cold. Carl had seen enough addicts come through the plant, good men who lost everything chasing that next hit. He knew the signs better than most, and he knew how to build a case that would stand up to scrutiny. "What are you thinking?" "Same as any. Incident report." He tapped his temple. "Document everything, times, dates, witnesses, build it clean, build it solid." The old rhythm came back to me then. 40 years of logging every detail, every near miss, every safety violation. It wasn't just about catching problems, it was about proving what happened so it could be fixed. "My place," I said. "I've got some things you should see." 20 minutes later, we sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee. I pulled out the yellow ledger where I'd been tracking Tommy's situation, and Carl nodded approvingly at the neat columns of dates and amounts. "Good start," he said, pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. "But we need more. Every missed rent payment, every empty pantry check, every promise broken. Build the pattern. We worked like we used to during arbitration hearings, methodical, thorough, leaving no detail unchecked. Dug out grocery receipts, bank statements, the landlord's eviction notice. Carl organized everything chronologically in a fresh manila folder. "Label it," he said, sliding me a marker. "Make it official." I wrote Tommy across the tab, then added today's date. Simple as that, but it felt like drawing a line in the sand. This wasn't just worry anymore. It was evidence. "Now for the ring," Carl said. "We need to track it." I started calling pawn shops, working through the yellow pages while Carl logged each contact. On the 7th call, a bored clerk confirmed what I'd feared. "Yeah, gold band. Inscription inside? Came in last Tuesday." His voice turned apologetic. "Already sold it, though. Guy came in with cash first thing Saturday." My throat tightened. Mary's ring passed from stranger to stranger, while Tommy went hungry. Carl must have seen something in my face, because he reached over and tapped the folder. "Focus, Walt. This isn't about shame, it's about fixing what's broken." He was right. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone one more time, dialing Raymond Pike's number. The landlord answered on the second ring. "Mr. Pike, Walter Hartley here. About my son's apartment. I'd like to meet first thing tomorrow. Work out a payment plan." 8 a.m., Pike said after a pause. "Bring proof of income." I hung up and checked my watch. Nearly 5. Carl gathered his notes while I locked the evidence file in my desk drawer. "Set your alarm for 6, he advised. "We'll need to review everything before you meet Pike." I walked him to the door, feeling more centered than I had in weeks. Maybe documentation couldn't solve everything, but it was a start. A way to outrun disaster before. Heavy footsteps in the hallway cut off that thought. They stopped outside my tharasor, followed by a knock that rattled the frame. The knock came again, harder this time. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people I didn't recognize. A woman with neat dark hair and a tall man in a button-down, both holding clipboards. My stomach dropped. You don't need 40 years reading incident reports to spot trouble in official clothing. I opened the door, keeping my voice steady. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Hartley?" The woman showed her ID. "I'm Denise Alvarez from Child Services. This is my colleague Mark Connolly. We received a complaint about unfit housing conditions regarding your grandson, Tommy." The words hit like a sucker punch. Child Services. Someone had called them. "There must be some mistake," I said, even as my mind raced through the implications. "Tommy's perfectly safe." "We need to verify that, sir." Mark's tone was professionally neutral. "We have a report from a concerned neighbor about the apartment upstairs." A neighbor. Someone who'd seen enough to make that call. I thought of David's apartment, the empty fridge, that stained mattress Tommy slept on. My chest tightened. "You're welcome to inspect my unit first," I offered, stepping back. "Tommy stays here most nights now anyway." Denise nodded, making notes as they walked through my apartment. I pointed out the fresh groceries, the made-up daybed in my office, Tommy's school books on the desk. Everything clean, everything organized, just like Mary had kept it. "Now," I said, grabbing my keys, "let's check upstairs." David's apartment told its own story. The milk I'd bought last week had curdled in the fridge. Nothing else inside but condiment packets and a dried-out lime. Denise photographed everything. The empty kitchen cabinets, the pile of unpaid bills, the mattress with its suspicious stains. "Temporary placement might be necessary," Mark said quietly to Denise. The words sent ice through my veins. "Now hold on," I cut in. "Tommy's got food at my place. He's got a proper bed, clean clothes, his homework gets done. I make sure of it." "Mr. Hartley," Denise turned to me, "while we appreciate your involvement, we need to ensure stable, documented care arrangements." "I've got documentation." I hurried back downstairs to grab the manila folder Carl and I had assembled. "Here, grocery receipts, dates I've had Tommy, even the eviction notice that explains why things are rough right now." She flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising slightly at the organized records. "This is thorough. 40 years keeping incident reports at the steel plant," I explained. "I know how to track problems and solve them." "Nevertheless," she closed the folder, "we'll need to schedule a follow-up visit. 48 hours with Tommy present. If we can't verify a stable living situation by then..." She let the sentence hang. "I understand." My voice stayed level, but my heart was hammering. "Thursday morning, 6 a.m. She handed me a card. "Call this number if anything changes before then." I walked them to the building entrance, mind already racing through what needed to be done. As they reached their car, Denise turned back. "Mr. Hartley, for what it's worth, it's clear you care about your grandson, but good intentions aren't enough. We need to see concrete proof of stability." I watched their taillights disappear around the corner, then leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath. Some neighbor, someone who lived right here, watched us every day, had dropped this match into our lives. The countdown that started with the eviction notice had just gotten shorter, and the stakes had gotten higher. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of what could happen in 48 hours. Tommy could be taken away. All my careful plans, the evidence gathering, the grocery runs, none of it would matter if I couldn't prove I could give him a stable home. My hands shook as I unlocked my door. 6:15 in the morning, and already the day felt like it had run a marathon. I had 48 hours to convince Child Services that Tommy belonged here with me. 48 hours to protect my grandson from a system that could swallow him whole. And somewhere in this building, a nameless neighbor was probably feeling mighty pleased with themselves. At 9 sharp, Carl and I sat across from Raymond Pike in his basement office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the landlord's ink-stained fingers look pale as he flipped through my yellow ledger. "These are unusually detailed records," Raymond said, adjusting his glasses. "Walter's famous for his paperwork," Carl spoke up. 40 years of safety reports at Riverton Steel. Never lost a dispute. I watched Raymond's expression carefully. Back in my union steward days, I'd learned to read people during negotiations. The slight nod, the way he kept returning to the payment columns. He was looking for a solution, not just a fight. "Here's what we're proposing," Carl continued, sliding a single typed sheet forward. "Half the arrears today, certified check, no waiting. The other half by the original deadline, guaranteed in writing." Raymond leaned back in his chair, making it creak. "That's still a significant amount to trust on faith." "I've got pension funds I can tap," I said, "and I'm willing to sign a temporary guardianship statement for Tommy. Shows I'm taking responsibility for the situation." The mention of Tommy made Raymond's eyes flick to the framed photo on his desk. Looked about middle school age, probably his own kid. Good. Sometimes the personal angle matters more than the numbers. "You understand," Raymond said slowly, "if the second payment doesn't come through, then you proceed with eviction, no contest," I finished. "But you'll have half your money instead of chasing David for all of it." He drummed his fingers on the desk, then nodded. "Cashier's check by noon, not a minute later." The drive to the credit union felt longer than usual. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind kept running calculations. The withdrawal would eat my medication buffer, and most of what I'd set aside for winter heating. Might have to wear an extra sweater when December came, but Tommy needed a roof over his head more than I needed comfort. "You sure about this, Walt?" Carl asked as we pulled into the parking lot. "You remember Mary's saying about tough choices?" I kept my voice light. "Sometimes you measure twice, but still have to cut once." The teller raised her eyebrows at the withdrawal amount, but didn't comment. 10 minutes later, I had a crisp cashier's check in my wallet. Another 10, and Raymond was writing out a receipt in his precise handwriting. 2 weeks, he reminded me, handing over the paper. "And Mr. Hartley, for what it's worth, I hope you can make this work. The boy seems like a good kid." I was just starting to feel like we had a foothold. Food in the cabinets, roof secured for a while longer, something solid to show Child Services, when Carl's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway to answer, but I could read trouble in his stance before he came back. "That was Janice from O'Rourke's," he said quietly. "David was in this morning talking to some guy in a leather jacket. Promised him money by Friday. Kept saying it over and over." My stomach dropped. Friday. The same day as the eviction deadline. The same day the second half of the rent was due. "A dealer," I said flatly. "It wasn't a question. Looks that way. Janice said the guy wasn't happy, but David swore up and down he'd have cash by then." I pressed my fingers against my temples, feeling the pressure build. David was probably planning to intercept the rent money somehow, use it to pay off whatever he owed. One crisis solved, another one charging straight at us, like a freight train. "Walt?" Carl's voice had that careful tone he used to use when we found structural problems in the plant. "What's the play here?" I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 9:45. Child Services would be back tomorrow morning. The dealer was expecting payment Friday, and somewhere in between, I had to figure out how to protect both Tommy and the rent money from whatever desperate scheme David was cooking up. First, I said, we need to talk to Janice, get a better description of this leather jacket character. Then we make some calls about Mary's ring. If David's promising money by Friday, I bet that's not the only thing he's planning to pawn. Carl and I worked like we used to during plant audits. Methodical, thorough, leaving no detail unchecked. He'd grab his reading glasses, I'd check dates twice, and we'd document everything that could matter. Got another one, Carl said, holding up his phone. Text from David last Tuesday. Need 500 by midnight, life or death situation. He shook his head. How many times has he used that line? I made a neat entry in the ledger. Add it to the stack with the others. What time was that one? 11:47 p.m. Carl squinted at the screen. Right after he asked his cousin Mike for cash. The kitchen table looked like a war room, papers spread out in careful rows. We had screenshots from 5 different people David had hit up for money, each message more desperate than the last. My old union training was paying off. Every piece of evidence got logged, dated, and filed. Remember to note who forwarded each text, I said. Chain of custody matters. Carl nodded, writing names and dates on yellow sticky notes, just like the safety reports. Speaking of which, he slid a wrinkled receipt across the table. Finally got hold of that clerk at Hager's Pawn. My throat tightened as I read the slip. Mary's wedding ring, sold for a fraction of its worth. The clerk had scrawled 14K gold band, inscribed in cramped handwriting, along with David's signature and driver's license number. You want to know the worst part? Carl's voice was quiet. Guy said David told him it was just old jewelry he found in a drawer. I had to close my eyes for a moment. Just old jewelry. The ring Mary had worn for 42 years, that she'd made me promise to pass down to Tommy someday. My hands wanted to shake, but I kept them steady as I added the pawn slip to our growing file. Legal aid opens at 8 tomorrow, I said. Already got the paperwork started for emergency custody. Smart move. Carl gathered up the text screenshots. Between the eviction notice, empty fridge photos, and these messages begging for drug money, should be pretty clear Tommy needs stability. It was nearly midnight when Carl finally headed home. I checked the locks twice, then peeked in on Tommy. He was curled up in my bed, clutching the spare pillow. The nightlight I'd borrowed from Mrs. Chen next door cast a soft glow across his face. "Sweet dreams, buddy," I whispered. Back at the kitchen table, I started labeling evidence envelopes. Exhibit A, food and housing documentation. Exhibit B, communication records. Exhibit C, financial transactions. My pen moved automatically, decades of procedural habits taking over. Mary's photo watched from its spot near the coffee maker. I touched the frame, gently. "I know you'd handle this better," I murmured. "You always knew how to reach him, but I promise you I'll protect Tommy. I'll fix what love couldn't." The clock read 1 a.m. when I finally lay down on the couch. Set my alarm for 6 hours. Needed to review everything before the legal aid appointment. I was just drifting off when bass vibrations rattled the windows. Some idiot's car stereo, I thought. Then I heard voices in the stairwell. "I swear to God, man, I'm good for it." David's voice slurred and desperate. I moved silently to the door, pressed my eye to the peephole. David was there, swaying slightly, talking to a tall figure in a leather jacket. "Friday," the man said. Quiet voice, dangerous voice. "No more extensions." "It's guaranteed," David insisted. "Food money's collateral. I swear Friday's a lock." Food money. My blood ran cold. He had to mean the grocery money I'd been giving Tommy, the emergency supplies I'd been sending home. The leather jacket moved closer to David. "Better be, 'cause if it ain't..." He left the threat hanging. Their footsteps faded down the stairs, but I stood frozen at the door, those words echoing in my head. Food money's collateral. My own son was using his child's meals as leverage with a drug dealer. Next morning, I clutched my evidence file like a lifeline as I walked into legal aid. The waiting room smelled of coffee and desperation, packed with folks whose problems probably matched mine. Ruth Stern, the paralegal assigned to my case, didn't waste time on small talk. She spread my documents across her desk, color-coded tabs marking key pages. "Documentation's solid," she said, tapping the rent receipts, "but we need sworn testimony. Let's draft subpoenas for your witnesses." I nodded, grateful for her efficiency. The bartender, Janice, she saw David without the ring, and the pawnshop clerk who logged it. Good starts. Ruth's pen moved quickly. Landlord 2 establishes the housing crisis timeline. She glanced up. Any other witnesses? Particularly to drug activities? My jaw clenched as I remembered last night's scene. There's a dealer. Heard him threatening David in the stairwell around 1 a.m. Tall, lean build, leather jacket. Quiet voice, the dangerous kind. Ruth's pen paused. Did you get a name? No, but the memory hit fresh. David called him something about food money being collateral. My grocery money for Tommy. He's using it to back drug debts. Christ. Ruth shook her head. If we could identify this dealer, his testimony about collateralizing child support would be damning. The bar might have security footage. An hour later, Carl and I stood in O'Rourke's back office, while the owner fast-forwarded through grainy images. The camera caught the parking lot, including David's usual corner. There, Carl pointed. Leather jacket, talking to David yesterday afternoon. Janice leaned in from behind us. That's Victor Lane, she said. Used to tend bar here till we caught him dealing. Real piece of work. Ruth worked fast once we had the name. By afternoon, subpoenas were filed for Janice, the pawn clerk, Raymond, Pike, and Victor Lane. I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe the system could work fast enough. That hope dimmed when Denise Alvarez knocked at 7 p.m. sharp, clipboard ready for our 48-hour review. I see improvements, she said, noting the fresh groceries and my rent payment receipt. But temporary removal remains an option pending court evaluation. My legs nearly buckled. After everything. The evidence, the witnesses, the money scraped. Together they might still take him. Please, my voice cracked. I've documented everything. Filed for emergency custody today. The rent's half paid. Tommy's got food. Mr. Hartley. Denise's tone was gentle but firm. We have to consider all options. The situation remains unstable. I felt every one of my 75 years then. Just an old man with scarred hands and aching joints, trying to hold his family together with paperwork and promises. One more night, I managed. Let me get his school records, a letter from his pediatrician, show you he's been looked after. Denise studied me for a long moment. Bring them by 9 a.m. tomorrow. But understand, if we determine removal is necessary, it happens immediately. After she left, I stood in the doorway of Tommy's room, holding his worn backpack. He'd colored a rocket ship on it last summer, back when David still had good days. The crayon was fading now. Could I really win this? The subpoenas were filed, but courts moved slow. Child services moved fast. Time was running out, and I was just one old man against a mountain of problems. Tommy stirred in his sleep, clutching that borrowed nightlight like a shield against the dark. 9 a.m. tomorrow. The clock was ticking. Chapter 9. Scene 1. Next morning, I was first in line when Riverside Elementary opened. The secretary remembered Tommy. Hard to forget a kid who never missed a day until David's spiral began. She printed his attendance record, adding a note about his perfect marks in reading. Such a sweet boy, she said, paper-clipping the pages, always sharing his lunch with others. My throat tightened at that. Dr. Peterson's office came next. The pediatrician had tracked Tommy since birth, through every earache and growth spurt. Her letter detailed Tommy's health history, recent weight loss, and my reliable presence at checkups. Walter, she said, handing me the envelope, you're doing the right thing. The conviction in her voice steadied my hands. Remember when Mary used to bring Tommy here for his shots? She'd sing silly songs to distract him, and he'd leave clutching a lollipop like treasure. Ruth was already spreading files across her desk when I arrived at Legal Aid. Let's build this timeline, she said, uncapping a red marker. She drew a line across a legal pad, marking the eviction notice date and Friday's deadline. Exhibit A. The notice itself, she said, labeling a folder. B through D are the grocery receipts, pawn slip, and David's text messages. E is Tommy's school and medical records. She tapped the final folder. F will be witness statements, once we get them under oath. I signed the emergency custody petition, my signature strong and clear. Ruth attached our motion to compel Victor Lane's testimony, then checked her watch. Judge McRae's clerk owes me a favor. Let's file this now. The courthouse hallways echoed with hurried footsteps. Ruth disappeared into the clerk's office while I sat on a hard bench, counting ceiling tiles to stay calm. When she emerged, Her slight smile told me something had worked. "Thursday at 2 p.m., she said. One day before the eviction deadline. I let out a breath I'd been holding since that first empty fridge. That's cutting it close. But it's enough time. Judge McCrae runs a tight courtroom. No delays, no excuses. Carl met me at O'Rourke's that afternoon, away from prying ears. We claimed a corner booth and he pulled out a notepad covered in questions. "Remember," he said, "stick to facts and dates. When did you first notice food missing? What exactly did David say about the ring? Keep your voice steady even when it hurts." We practiced for hours, Carl playing tough prosecutor, me learning to breathe through the hard parts. 40 years of safety reports had taught me how to lay out evidence, step by step. "Good," Carl nodded finally. "You're ready. Just remember, you're not just some worried grandpa. You're Tommy's last line of defense. Back home, a blinking light on my answering machine caught my eye. Denise from Child Services, acknowledging Thursday's hearing. She'd be there to observe, deciding Tommy's fate based on what unfolded. I packed Tommy's good clothes in his backpack, the blue button-down shirt Mary bought him last Christmas, khaki pants still crisp with tags, court clothes, fighting clothes. Kneeling at Mary's photo, I touched the glass gently. "I'll speak for both of us tomorrow," I whispered. "Tell the truth about our boy, about Tommy, make it right." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Hartley?" A clipped, professional voice. "James Morton, counsel for Victor Lane. My client will appear as subpoenaed, but only to state facts on record. Nothing more." "Understood," I said, matching his tone. The dealer would show. One more piece clicking into place. I hung up and checked my evidence file one last time. Every receipt, every date, every broken promise documented. Tomorrow would test whether paper could really beat betrayal. Looking at Tommy sleeping peacefully in the spare room, I felt the weight of Thursday bearing down. One chance to make the judge understand. One day to save him before eviction changed everything. Thursday morning hit like a freight train. I'd been up since 4, checking files, straightening Tommy's collar, and watching dawn creep across my kitchen floor. Every tick of that wall clock reminded me what was coming. Carl met us outside the courthouse steps at 8:30. His steady presence helped anchor me as we climbed those granite stairs, Tommy's small hand wrapped tight in mine. The building still smelled exactly like it did 40 years ago when I'd testify about plant safety violations. All polish and paper and tension. You ever notice how courthouses have this way of making you feel small, even when you know you're right? Ruth was already posted in the third-floor hallway, herding witnesses like a border collie with a legal pad. She had Raymond Pike stationed near the water fountain, Janice from O'Rourke's on a wooden bench, and the pawn shop clerk fidgeting by a window. No sign of Victor Lane yet. "Remember," Ruth whispered, straightening my tie, "just like we practiced. Facts first, feelings second." Inside courtroom C, David slouched at the defendant's table, refusing to meet my eyes. His lawyer kept whispering in his ear, but David just stared at his hands. Tommy squeezed closer to my side. When Judge McCrae called me to testify, my legs felt wooden climbing those 3 steps to the witness stand. But 40 years of union meetings had taught me how to steady my voice, even when my heart was racing. I laid out our story like building a foundation wall. Brick by careful brick. Started with that first empty fridge, then the grocery receipts filed by date. Explained my pension calculations, the partial rent payment, Tommy's regular meals at my place. Pulled out that yellow ledger where I'd tracked everything. "And you maintained this record consistently?" Ruth asked. "Yes, ma'am, same way I logged safety incidents at the plant, date, time, details." Raymond Pike testified next, confirming the eviction notice and my payment plan. "Mr. Hartley Sr. provided half the arrears," he said, and documented ability to cover the rest. His testimony was dry as dust, but solid. Janice took the stand after him, her usual bartender swagger softened by courthouse formality. But she didn't hesitate describing David's pawned wedding ring or his mounting bar tabs. "Said he'd buy it back," she recalled, "but that was weeks ago." The pawnshop clerk's testimony was brief, but damaging. He pulled out their carbon copy receipt showing the ring's sale. David's signature looked shaky even from where I sat. Then Victor Lane walked in. Ever see a room's temperature drop 20 degrees in 1 second? That's what happened. He wore a clean dress shirt instead of his leather jacket, but menace still rolled off him like smoke. Ruth approached the witness stand carefully. "Mr. Lane, what was your business relationship with?" "David Hartley. Financial arrangements," Victor answered flatly. His eyes never left the middle distance. "Did these arrangements involve collateral?" "Yes." "What type of collateral?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Money he was supposed to receive." "From where specifically?" "Food money." Victor's voice stayed empty. "For his kid. Said his old man gave it regular, so it was guaranteed income." The gallery's sharp intake of breath seemed to suck all the air from the room. I felt my hands start trembling against the table edge. "To be clear," Ruth pressed, "David Hartley offered his son's food money as collateral for drug purchases." "Correct." I watched David's face drain white, then flush dark red, as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Judge McCrae had to tap her gavel twice for order. That moment burned itself into my memory like a brand. Everything we'd built, every piece of evidence, every careful step, it all crystallized around Victor's flat confession. The weight of it felt like a steel beam dropping into place. But we weren't done. David's lawyer still had cross-examination coming, and I could see him shuffling papers, getting ready to try muddying these crystal-clear waters. I gripped the edge of my seat and waited, knowing we'd hit bedrock truth, but wondering if it would be enough. Ruth kept her rhythm steady, like a veteran machinist who knows exactly when to press forward. She approached the bench with my yellow ledger held high. "Your Honor, we move to enter this business record as Exhibit D," she said, "documenting Mr. Hartley Sr.'s consistent support and financial oversight." I watched Judge McCrae leaf through those pages I'd filled night after night. Each entry told its own small story: grocery runs, utility payments, doctor visits. The judge's reading glasses caught the fluorescent light as she nodded. "The court accepts this exhibit," she said, "along with the pawn slip as corroborating evidence of financial misconduct." David's lawyer tried objecting, something about hearsay, but the judge waved him off. "The defendant's own signature appears on multiple documents," she said. "The timeline is clear." My hands had stopped shaking by then. Funny how certainty can steady you, even when your world's about to shift on its axis. I thought about Mary's empty chain around David's neck, about Tommy's hollow cheeks that first Sunday. The pieces had finally locked together. Judge McCrae set down her papers and looked straight at me. "In light of the demonstrated pattern of neglect and financial exploitation, this court grants emergency custody of Thomas Hartley to his grandfather, Walter Hartley, effective immediately." "You can't do this!" David's shout cracked across the courtroom. He shot to his feet, shoving his chair back. "Dad turned everyone against me. The bartender, the landlord. He planned this." The gallery's silence hit harder than any response could have. I watched decades of neighborhood respect drain away from my son in seconds. Even his lawyer wouldn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Hartley," Judge McCrae's voice could have chilled steam, "you will compose yourself or be held in contempt. This court further orders supervised visitation rights contingent upon completion of substance abuse treatment and financial counseling." Ruth slid the custody papers in front of me, pointing where to sign. My signature looked steady, even though my heart was racing. To my left, Denise from Child Services was already updating their file, her pen scratching official notes. I felt a tug on my sleeve then. Tommy had been so quiet through everything, I'd almost forgotten he was pressed against my side. His brown eyes looked up at me, full of a child's simple need for certainty. "Can we go home now?" he whispered. The tears I'd been holding back started burning behind my eyes, but I kept my spine straight. Mary's voice echoed in my memory. "Sometimes being strong means letting others see you care." I squeezed Tommy's hand and nodded, but kept my attention forward. Judge McCrae still had her glasses on, reviewing one final set of documents. "Before we conclude," she said, "we need to address the matter of record sealing and parental decision rights." We pulled into Jenkins Paint around 2 that afternoon. I'd been thinking about this stop since the hearing ended. Funny how your mind latches onto practical tasks when emotions run high. Carl followed in his pickup, ready to help like always. "What shade you thinking?" he asked as we walked in. "Porch white," I said. "Clean slate." Tommy held onto my hand while I paid for 2 gallons. The old floorboards needed that fresh coat, a visible marker between then and now. You ever notice how paint can make the past feel further away? Back home, Carl and I got straight to work. The September sun felt just right, warming our shoulders while we rolled even strokes across those weathered boards. Tommy sat on the steps, lining up his Hot Wheels in perfect rows. The sound of his quiet vroom vroom mixed with our brush strokes and the rustle of leaves. "Remember Mary's rose bushes?" Carl asked, nodding toward the empty flower bed. "Yeah." I dipped my roller, thinking about planting some new ones come spring. We worked steady, the way we used to on plant maintenance shifts. The paint went on smooth, covering years of scuffs and water stains. I'd replaced 3 rotted boards last weekend, anticipating this day. Hope's funny that way, makes you prepare even when you're not sure you'll win. "Looking good, Walter," Carl said, stepping back to check our progress. I had to agree. The porch gleamed like a fresh start. While the paint dried, I brought out the rocking chair I'd been refinishing in the basement. Took me a week of evenings to strip the old varnish, sand it down, and seal it proper. Mary used to love sitting in it, watching neighborhood kids play kickball in the street. Now it would hold new memories. I positioned it carefully on the dry section, then set up a small table beside it. Mary's photo went there, right next to Tommy's signed school forms. The late afternoon light caught her smile just right. "Grandad," Tommy looked up from his cars. "Can I have my own shelf in the bathroom?" "Sure can, buddy." I ruffled his hair. "We'll set it up after dinner." Inside, I took my time organizing. The custody order went into my filing cabinet, right behind Mary's will. Those visitation guidelines, the ones spelling out David's supervised visits and required treatment, got magneted to the fridge. Structure matters when you're rebuilding. Carl stayed for coffee while the evening news played low in the background. They showed David leaving the courthouse alone, shoulders hunched against cameras. The food money testimony had done what 40 years of neighborhood goodwill couldn't survive. The anchorwoman mentioned shocking revelations and breach of trust. I clicked it off. Some things you don't need to watch twice. "You good?" Carl asked, setting down his mug. "Yeah?" I nodded toward Tommy, who was arranging his cars on the coffee table now. "Got what matters right here." The screen door closed behind Carl with that familiar spring-loaded thump. The house settled into evening sounds, pipes humming, floorboards creaking, dinner simmering on the stove. I breathed in deep, fresh paint, dish soap, and baked chicken layering together like a normal night. Tommy looked up from his cars. "Can we eat on TV trays and watch cartoons?" "Not tonight, bud," I smiled. "We're having dinner at the table, but maybe Saturday we can do TV trays." He nodded, accepting the new routine already. Kids are resilient that way once they feel secure. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him play. The porch paint was drying bright white through the window. Mary's photo caught the last sunlight on its silver frame. Everything smelled clean, settled, like order restored in small, steady pieces.